Started. Thank you everyone for joining us today for the second meeting of the Landslide Early Warning System Data Working Group. And just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today, just a quick review or restatement of our working group objectives and motivation, a summary of the meeting number 1 kickoff we had in January, and then a little bit about next steps, and mostly talking about some programming for MayDay event, and also some open discussion about some of the topics that came up in January. So thanks everyone for joining. We've got, I guess, now about 17 people, so good to see a continued turnout. Dahlia already mentioned this, but please sign in again on the spreadsheet. There's a link in the chat, and just list your name and affiliation and location so we can keep tabs on who's coming and contact you about updates. And there's a few columns in there that we'll get to later in today's discussion. I think that's it. Dahlia, anything else you want to start off with?
No, welcome everybody.
Okay. And just a quick reminder to mute your microphones if you're not speaking. And if you'd like to say anything or chime in, please do interrupt and raise your hand, or just unmute and turn on your video and show yourselves and tell us what you're thinking. But otherwise, we'll kind of chart through a little bit of review, and then I'd like to have quite a bit of discussion with everyone today, which would be great. And we've got a nice, cozy group. So just to reiterate, and sorry, I guess there's some animations in my slides that I forgot were in here. The main goal of this working group is to promote open data and sharing of information that can be used for landside model development, parameterization, or evaluation. And so in terms of that goal, that we kind of had 4 main things that we wanted to do, and one being a review paper of landside early warning system data needs and opportunities, establishing some benchmark data sets for landside warning system model testing and comparison between different approaches, a repository with inventories and metadata for consistent data sharing and open data sharing, and then just kind of not necessarily a product, but a forum for those of us working on this topic to get together, discuss ideas and knowledge gaps, etc. So anyone want to chime in with any other thoughts or ideas at this point? Okay. So we had 35 active working group members who either attended or provided input on the spreadsheet last meeting in January. That was great. Thank you very much for all the interest and constructive feedback. There were a number of common themes and topics of interest, in particular the issue of different types of data and how to kind of categorize and understand them, a need for reliable, timely, and accurate data inputs, and especially data standards that we could all kind of agree on or refer to. A lack of common concepts and definitions, which is a little bit more nebulous to me, and I hope we can get into that discussion a little bit later. And a need for an open and organized data repository, which is great because that's one of the things we're hoping to work on. Dahlia and I had initially proposed kind of 3 sub-working groups to work on the review, the benchmarks, and the repository separately, and there was a lot of broad and overlapping interest in all 3 of those initiatives. What there wasn't as much interested in was leading sub-working groups, which I can completely understand. I think there was kind of some concern about having support or the additional time obligation. So Dahlia and I discussed this a little bit and decided that it might be best that now, at this point, since there was so much overlap between interests and kind of some overlap between the objectives, that we would shelve that idea of having separate working group meetings, separate sub-working group meetings to get stuff done, and transition instead to kind of a more uniform meeting for all of us to get together. And this is kind of what we propose, and I'd like to get input from everyone here today, since you're here for the second meeting as well. But just kind of having a meeting, about 8 meetings a year, or every 1.5 months or so, for an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the needs, and starting with just kind of a review and summary, a recap, or any individual progress reports or things that people want to chime in about. And then what we'd like to do is have some presentation from someone in the community or in the group either introducing a potential benchmark data set, highlighting a data set, either yours or some other data set that you've been using, and describe the metadata and why and what was useful about it, so they can start kind of getting some ideas for what the repository would look like and what the benchmark data sets should look like, and getting direct input and ideas from you. And also, ideally, we could kind of start, I will be taking notes during everyone's presentation, start trying to pull together a synthesis for the review paper, so that we're kind of achieving all these objectives together at once. And of course, we'd like to request volunteers, and we'll kind of reach out to some people we think might be able to do that initially. But so that would be kind of the middle 30 minutes or so, and then have some discussion and planning and synthesis talks at the end, which may last up to a half hour or so. And our thought was that this would kind of get direct input from some of you, also give us some concrete things to talk about, and kind of start chipping away at all the three objectives in one. And it may be that 1 month we have a kind of more benchmark focused, and those of you not interested wouldn't need to attend. And we might have ones that's more repository focused, and those of you not interested wouldn't need to attend. So any thoughts or feedback on that? If you love the idea or hate it, you could put a thumbs up or thumbs down in the chat, or we can also just move on, and I'll assume that this is kind of what we will pursue. And then, if and when specific tasks start to emerge in the coming years, we may revisit the idea of subgroups or smaller subgroup meetings if that's needed. Dahlia, did I miss anything we talked about?
Nope. Does anyone have any comments on this format, or want to volunteer to give an initial presentation in our next or subsequent meetings? Okay. Well, we may invite you. So please put your name in the spreadsheet so we know who's there. And if you have any other comments, we welcome comments in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and unmute to share as well.
Yeah. Thanks. So I think that's where we'll be heading for our next, not our next meeting, which our next. Oops. Let me get this slide to advance. Our next meeting is obviously going to be the MayDay event in May, and we had this January past meeting and April today, and then we kind of envisioned a couple meetings early in the summer, and then a few in the fall, and then potentially if and hopefully we're able to all, many of us are able to attend the World Landslide Forum. We might all convene there in November of this year. So that's kind of the loose schedule we envisioned for meetings. So we'll talk about the MayDay event, as I mentioned, in a little bit. And this was kind of the rough timeline for the products I talked about converge on some kind of proposed benchmark data set lists by the end of this year. And so the presentations that we have, the coming meetings, and a spreadsheet that Dahlia's got in the chat. I think you can add that one now too if you'd like. Dahlia's put together another spreadsheet where if you have an idea about a proposed benchmark data set and would like to put that in there, with links and more information, that would be great. If we don't get any volunteers to present, we may go through that list and look at the most promising ones and ask you to present in one of our working group meetings. So our hope is to have that really by the end of the year, an idea of what the benchmark data sets would look like, and then submit the review paper sometime in about a year from now, or a little bit further down the road. And then in 2023, at the end of our kind of 2-year working group, mandate is establish that centralized data repository. So that's kind of the timeline. If there's any concerns or thoughts about that, please chime in.
Could I just add a small comment?
Please.
I could do a guided presentation on probably the review paper. Any ideas you would want me to present? I mean, I'm not used to presenting to an expert committee, but if you want me to volunteer, I'm ready.
Excellent. We'll follow up with you in terms of future presentations. I'll make a note of that for sure, and can provide some additional guidance as well.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I will move on. So MayDay, at least in this time zone, and for many of you, it's going to be Wednesday, May 19th. The Working Group 6 has some couple hours scheduled for programming. Dahlia, do you want to, I think you have a better sense of what this is all looking like.
Sure, and we have some of the organizing committee on the line, which is great. So we are planning a 24-hour landslide early warning system extravaganza, where we will have content featured in every hour of the day. And so each of the working groups have several hours during that 24-hour period where they can, where they're invited to present content. So Ben has indicated the 3 options for our team. The first is going to be a panel discussion where we can where I'm going to invite some people who have new data sets, new methodologies, to have short talks and then a discussion about kind of where we're going with these data capabilities, with open methods, etc. The thought for the second period, the second spot was to actually have lightning presentations, 5 to 8 minute or so presentations, and we were actually going to invite those who gave EGU presentations and might be able to recycle or to combine their presentation. These will all be pre-recorded, and so we'll put them all together and then have an engagement that we can have in the chat, etc. So that those who are not, when this time zone is not convenient, such as 1 a.m. in Europe, can still participate in that session and have their presentation. And then the third option is there's several hours where it's a little bit less convenient for those in North America and South America and Europe to participate. And so that is additional invitation to give pre-recorded presentations, and we can provide guidance on how to do that. I found the most useful is through PowerPoint. They have a really slick system. But we would like people to sign up. And so in the attendance sheet, in column E, they have indicated if you're interested in presenting some of your work at MayDay. Again, it doesn't have to be thorough. It can be a 5-minute to 8-minute presentation. If you would like to, maybe put in a title, and we'll be contacting you to provide more information. And so we encourage you to. It can be about your research. It can be about your new data sets, your methodologies. It can just be a perspective of where you see things going in this community. All of those topics are welcome. And we'll be providing some follow-up guidance, working with the other organizers to provide that information and get presentations in advance to put into this event. So again, if you could go to the spreadsheet, the attendance spreadsheet I posted in the chat, and add whether or not you're interested. Again, it doesn't have to be 100% confirmation. Yes, no, if needed is fine, and we can follow up from there.
Yeah, and I guess I'll just chime in. One thought I had with the lightning presentations, we have these every so occasional meetings, and there's a lot of other working groups as well, and we don't all have time to attend all the working group meetings, which I wish I did, but we don't really have the chance to meet each other. And so I thought also that the lightning presentations would be an opportunity to spend 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes talking, introducing yourself, what you do, what kind of projects you're working on. I think that would be a really useful thing for all of us to see. And so that might also be kind of a starting point for future presentations in our working group. So the other, how to participate, Dahlia actually has the spreadsheet now. I'd written in the slides to email us, but please put it in the spreadsheet. That would be most convenient. But suggest questions or issues that the panel discussion can touch on, volunteer to present, suggest a pre-recorded, or someone else, if you have a student or a colleague who you think would be great, that would be wonderful. And of course, whenever your time zone allows, tune in to MayDay. That 4 to 6 a.m. CET slot might work well for me evenings after. Okay. Any questions or ideas about our MayDay programming? Okay, one thumbs up, Corey.
And we'll be circulating a full agenda soon, and so we encourage you to forward this to colleagues. You do have to register to get the link, but anyone is welcome to attend. It's really to engage the community and educate people about what this new network is, but also to solicit feedback and get participation. So please, this is all encompassing. Please forward the invitation to others to participate as well.
Okay, cruising right through. So at this point, I wanted to, since we still have quite a bit of time and there's a lot of interesting ideas that came up in the spreadsheet from your input last meeting, I wanted to discuss some of these things in greater detail and have some time to get into what some of you meant. I think there's only so much room in a spreadsheet to type your ideas, and now's a little bit more time to elaborate or get into some details. So I'm going to kind of go through some slides that summarize the individual points that people touched on and some of the common themes, and please raise your hand or just unmute and start talking if you have something to add. Otherwise, it'll be real boring with just me talking. So this is the kind of perhaps most dense and most common overlap that everyone talked about, was this issue of different data types. And that there's so many different layers in this. But in particular, I think all of us can appreciate the need to link forcing data, so rainfall, snowmelt, whatever that might be, with the landside inventory, the timing and location of landslides. And both of those types of data sets have a huge amount of disparity. So I will just quickly summarize, but please interrupt me at any point, or we'll kind of get into these individual topics in greater detail. I'm going to turn off my video because I just got a notice that my Wi-Fi can't handle this. So everyone can still see the slide though? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, looks good.
So in terms of landside inventories, the location and timing, one thing that came up fairly often was this issue of the type of slope failure, and that's often underappreciated and not reported in inventories, and I certainly found that to be the case. It's very different to develop a warning system for debris flows versus rock falls or reactivation of slow-moving slides, and that really is a piece of information that needs to be included in future landside inventories, and even going back into existing inventories to try to separate different types, so that when developing early warning systems, we can kind of target our approach. Landslide locations, how much does the positional accuracy matter? And I think that matters to some extent on what scale of forcing data you're using. The type of landslide event, whether that's isolated or widespread triggering events. And someone commented that there's a fairly strong emphasis on widespread events, but that it's harder to find individual or isolated events that might be just as important or almost as important for landslide warning systems. And of course, the big issue is reporting bias. So urbanized areas, infrastructure corridors, et cetera, and that's perhaps underappreciated, and there's not really a definitive way to record or report that. So I guess at this point, before digging into the forcing data, does anyone have any ideas or comments or elaboration on the inventory side of things and the issue of different data types?
Hey, Ben, just,
yeah.
Just a bit of a question, because it's something I'm not struggling with, but working on right now in North America, is that a lot of the data is biased towards these sudden events. Of course, in the shallower, steeper slopes where we have more immediate response to precipitation and develop landslide scars, I think we're doing pretty well there in developing and using a lot of EO tools to kind of build out inventories. But in the area of slow moving or creeping landslides, which is where I focus on, we're pulling apart those data sets and realizing that, it's critical velocity changes that matter, and we're not getting that from these data sets. So one of the things I'm doing, and I just popped an email to you and Dahlia for feedback, is we're starting to mine using the INSAR data and in situ data to build out activity inventories. So different temporal data points that correspond to specific spatial data points. So a specific landslide, we may end up having 20 data points that represent very different velocity trends, and trying to integrate those with different weather factors, soil moisture. So anyways, that's one thing I'm finding in the literature that we're not reporting on as much as activity, that I think we need to do a better job on. And if you want to put a placeholder for a working group that I'm very happy to be heavily involved in, looking at mapping, building out activity inventories for slower moving landslides, I think that's a pretty big gap that we can work on collectively. Just throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great idea. And sorry, I just saw something in the chat that.
Just to build off of that, with the hopefully success of NISAR launching in end of 2022, the goal is actually to provide a North America-wide deformation map using INSAR to start to identify some of the active areas and provide, pretty frequent repeat overpasses. So assuming things are, successful, that, teeing up some of the community to use that data, I think would be really powerful. Because it'll be hopefully a very effective way to characterize that slow-moving activity in a routine manner.
Yeah, and we absolutely, Dali. And one of the things our European colleagues, fortunately, are it's not L-band, but have built such deep regional data sets, high quality data sets with the Sentinel data. That would be, again, a suggestion is the more we can do, with this international audience where you do have regional and now start, even with Sentinel from 2016 to present, to start building out activity inventory data. I think will be an important step. But yeah, and we're all excited about NISAR, Dahlia. Absolutely, I think that'll really change. But starting to prep out from a data collection and looking at data needs and how we structure data and metadata around activity data. We should be thinking about it now, so we're ready for things like NISAR.
Yeah, and I think what this to me brings up is the issue that maybe we need a benchmark data set with 1 or 2 or however many n examples of INSAR data being in activity, and exactly what you've put together, Corey, as kind of, there's a lot of inventories of landslide occurrence, but activity being a very different kind of approach. So I think in the review paper, we'll need to have some discussion of that and the kind of divergence between landslide occurrence and landslide activity, or landslide reactivation, or initiation is kind of this encompassing word, but once they've started, they don't stop. And so the INSAR data is a real unique tool for that. There's a couple comments in the chat. I've made a note of this, and I think maybe Corey, you might be able to present at some point on what you're doing. But John, you've got a comment in the chat about the HR 8810. For those of you not in the United States, there's a National Landslide Preparedness Act that was passed in January of this year, signed into law, and it basically mandates that the U.S. Geological Survey, partnering with other agencies, start developing a national landslide awareness and preparedness plan. There's a lot of language in the bill.
It actually asks for a report of a national landslide map publicly available in 11 months.
So I can speak a bit to that. So there is an interagency coordinating committee to develop the plan report for the National Landslide Preparedness Act. So it's modeling similar to NEHRP, which is the National Earthquake Preparedness Act. So I'm the representative from NASA, but there's about 18 representatives from different agencies around the US that are contributing to this. We just had our kickoff meeting not that long ago. And so the goal is to develop the plan essentially by I guess January of next year, to implement what will be the process. So I don't know if we're gonna, the susceptibility map, and Ben can actually speak a bit more to this, of the US is actually a separate project. But in terms of the National Landslide Hazard Preparedness Act, we will be working towards a more coordinated way to report on major landslides across the US, and that what constitutes a major landslide is maybe something we could discuss as this group, but that's going to be a definition that needs to be defined. Bringing together the different operational communities to identify the needs in terms of resource allocation for implementing these systems, both from the research side, implemented by U.S. Geological Survey and the National Science Foundation, and then how we're going to essentially roll this out. And so all of that has to be put in place by January and get approved. And there is money that that Congress has indicated, has appropriated, though appropriated, authorized. Either way, we're
Hasn't
hoping.
happened yet, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that hasn't
the
happened
kind
yet.
of a nuance of American politics is that they can sign a law that mandates something but doesn't actually have funding associated with it yet. So that's currently the case. And so the planning process, as Dahlia mentioned, has started. The actual efforts will initiate once that money gets actually approved. And I will note that the USGS has, in coordination with Dahlia and NASA and other state geological surveys, has put together a national landside inventory database. That does exist, and I'll dig up the link and put it in the chat. And I could potentially present on that in one of our working group meetings. The main focus is on any and all landslides, so that integrates everything that Dahlia has mapped it in terms of media reports and individual landslides across the U.S. or state survey mapping of landslide deposits that don't necessarily have a date associated with it. So we are developing that product, and I think I should present on that in one of these upcoming meetings. Maybe not the next one, because I think there's probably some more interesting work that others could present.
Are those actions public?
Yep, it's a publicly available map. I'll send you the link in just a minute.
Are the proceedings and the configuration of the plan, is that also public? And I just asked because I think in the original meeting some months back, right, one of the goals of LandAware was to have an actualized international resource, so if you will, a UN of a landslide early warning system. And this is pretty unique in North America that we've gotten to this opportunity, albeit it took a couple hundred years. How this is going to work is going to be really interesting, because there's a lot of competing science and whatnot, and it might be a good example to share for this group based on all the work that has already been done in other nations. Sometimes we don't look so far outside to have a better idea of what to do inside. So.
And John, that's a great point. So I actually brought that up on the first call, is that there's a lot of lessons learned from other countries, other regions who have implemented successful early warning systems. And so that's something. There's going to be, I believe, an internal meeting in June, a workshop, virtual, that will really start to figure out how to put this together, figure out what to consider. But I will absolutely follow up with respect to what is public along the way. The report absolutely will be made public. The plans will be made public once they're approved. I'm not sure what USGS is leading this effort, and I'm not sure, what visibility happens in the planning process or not. Hopefully there's as much as we can.
There's some sort of comment period related to that, but that may not be until the report is kind of approved for release. And that's one of the nuances with working at the USGS. So everything we publicly release does have to go through a internal review process before that's made available. So I'll have an update, or Dahlia and I will have an update probably at the next working group meeting on that. If that's.
I just have one more point there, if I can. So we're participating in one of the focus groups of the NISAR teams through some communication from RTI, who reached out to us, and it might be interesting for this committee to have availability to participate, or from someone in the committee here to participate in one of those upcoming, because the kind of landslide geohazard one hasn't been scheduled according to the information I have from a couple days ago. Just throwing that out there.
And I believe this is the effort for the decadal observatory, so the designated observables, and this is kind of going into really the future in terms of future missions. I'll follow up with you on that, just so I understand where the surface deformation and change study is with respect to engaging these communities, because that's very important. I did want to note another question that you asked is who is doing the deformational maps? And so this was something that was identified as part of the Satellite Needs Working Group. And there's a lot of US talk here, but essentially what happens is the different agencies submit requests on the key products they would like to see to enhance their work. And so NASA is working with these agencies to identify those, products that are likely to really be meaningfully impact and help other agencies. Those are all public products that will be released. One of them, and John, I'll put it in the chat. I'm trying to find my notes quickly, but is a deformational map of the United States using INSAR. And so that will be developed and funded as part of this effort through the Satellite Needs Working Group. So there is actually a plan to implement that once NISAR launches, and there's the funding, hopefully, to do that. I believe NASA or a team of NASA and colleagues will be working on that specifically. I'll put the specific information I have in the chat just so, because that was pretty broad.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
So I guess this is great, and I think this points that there is some interest in the activity surrounding that specific law. To try to maybe move back to some information and discussion that might be relevant to everyone internationally. I saw an interesting comment here on landslide position, and Corey also just made a nice comment in the chat, which I think I'd like to move to the next slide related to data standards. And I think there's a real need for, oh, my slides aren't advancing. A real need for kind of some clear metric and data standards that might be included in the metadata of this data repository that we're talking about in benchmark data sets, in terms of, is this associated with, or is this along some linear or infrastructure or human related structures, so that that kind of is a way of introducing the reporting bias related to landslide impacts and reporting. And also positional accuracy. There's a number of ways that this could be looked at, and I'd be curious to hear what people say. I mean, there's the kind of scale of mapping and scale of resolution at which the landslide was identified. There's also kind of uncertainty in exact positional location, but that gets complicated by whether you're looking at a point versus a polygon. And so there's maybe some discussion points there of how would we develop a metadata criteria or some criteria in an inventory that communicates positional accuracy. And maybe at this point, let's see, I'm trying to see who made that comment. Mario, maybe you want to elaborate a little bit on what you've been doing in El Salvador related to positional accuracy, or maybe you have some questions for the group.
Well, I have some questions on how you do it, what the format of your inventory is. Right now, my plan is to have different levels of positional accuracy, like let's say kilometers, meters, or so. And well, I have also a feel for the positional accuracy if is known. For example, if I know that the landslide was mapped with accuracy of 100 meters, for example, I can add it, but I don't know why it is the way you do it.
I think at this point there isn't really a clear protocol, and I'd love to hear what other people have done in their and maybe this is something that can come up again in when and if you present to the group to present how you've dealt with positional accuracy, because there really are, like you said, there's a lot of different ways of doing it, and it depends on what your data is. So what I would love to see emerge in the discussion and review paper and through additional presentations is what are the different ways that people have dealt with it? Is there a recommendation we can make, or a best practices protocol for reporting accuracy in the context of a landslide warning system? I think these are big questions, and no single group has tackled it, I think, satisfactorily. So I see some comments in the chat. This is from you, Dahlia. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to invite Corey to kind of give a perspective, since I know that both for slow-moving landslides, but also for rapid landslides, this topic has come up quite a bit. So you shared some comments in the chat, but I don't know, Corey, if you want to articulate any of those specifically with respect to data quality or to the accuracy in reporting.
I don't know if I have any specific comments right now. Again, this is a real-time journey. As I've said in the chat, you know, I now know we're becoming a bit U.S. centric. I'm sitting in Canada, but I'm working for clients across North America, and regulators are requiring precipitation-based landslide thresholds for pipelines across the United States, and they're starting purely based on, you know, precipitation and occurrence without a lot of guidance. So the whole question of even, you know, what type of data needs to be collected, you know, and not even thinking about data quality right now. It's a couple steps ahead, but even, you know, that it's something that's really hitting and again in North America right now. So I don't know if I can really provide much
No, not at all.
besides filling space, Delia, but yeah, it's absolutely, these are big, this is a big deal. I just, my head's not around that, getting that to that depth yet.
And no, yeah, sorry to call you out there, but I think it as you indicated, it's an evolving process, and so I just wanted to pause as we're talking through this, and people are providing really valuable comments in the chat. And please feel free to raise your hand and or just unmute as well. So this benchmark data sets to support landslide early warning, I've just put the sheet in the chat again. This is the initial cut of, you know, what data sets may be out there that you know of or that you think could be relevant. But again, the categories that we put are preliminary. And so as we're going through, if you have suggestions of additional categories or ways to clarify some of the columns that we're asking you to populate, please let us know. You can also change them yourself or suggest something else in a different font color. Because I think that, you know, ultimately the goal of this is to get a first cut of, are there some data sets that we can use to start to understand what benchmark data sets could be, or what even available open inventories there are, with the ultimate goal, as Ben said, in 2023 of having some sort of coordinated effort for, you know, identifying either the metadata or the repository themselves. So so I guess I want to make sure to open it up. I see many of you are on this sheet, and I want to just see, with respect to what Ben's already presented in terms of information on the types of events. So right now we've only been talking about landslide inventories, but, you know, there's obviously tons of other data sets that are relevant. We can categorize them separately, but also with respect to information content, reliability, accuracy, that doesn't really factor in yet. And we can absolutely add that, or we can put it as a comment of kind of the level of accuracy. As you know, there's been a tremendous number of data sets published. The one that Ben has, which we can put in the chat, does have a suggested accuracy ranking in terms, it's a qualitative ranking in terms of the quality of the data. You know, is it LiDAR derived? Is it like media points? Obviously, points from media. Obviously, those will have quite different ranges in terms of their accuracy. But yeah, I encourage either the conversation to continue in the chat or to raise your hand and speak as well, because this is a working group, right? We don't have all the answers, and we really are leaning on you to provide your guidance and input here.
I've put the link to the USGS national inventory map in the chat. I will present on that at a later date, but yeah, we really had to come up with an ad hoc characterization of confidence in the location. I mean, we were dealing with, Dalia said, everything from LiDAR maps, landslide scarps, to individual points outlined by the media. Some of them have dates. Most of them don't have dates. I think when we're talking about landslide early warning systems, that you need to have dates. So there's also the temporal accuracy issue. And I think I have that in the later slide, or maybe it's here. But ultimately, I think what I would like to see come out of this discussion, not today, the discussions that we have every few months, is what is a framework for categorizing data that is consistent and can be applied across benchmark data sets, can be applied to any new data set, and also sort of provide standards or guidelines for if someone wants to start collecting or assembling a landside inventory, what are the main things they should be looking for. And I think that's ultimately what we'll highlight in the review paper, and we'll point to benchmark data sets in that, and we will certainly hope that most of what gets submitted into the repository follows that, or at least is within that that architecture. So I'm seeing some more comments in the chat that I'll have to catch up on while I've been talking here. But ultimately, I think there's a lot of interest here, and I would like to maybe the next steps beyond this discussion is I'll summarize what has come up during this meeting and try to I guess just identify key priorities and that we can maybe spend more focused time discussing in coming meetings. Is there anything on this slide that I should have talked about that we haven't brought up yet? This is one key thing. If those of you are looking at the U.S. inventory, this lack of a reported landslide does not mean that no landslides occurred, and that's been a really challenging thing to communicate with stakeholders and the public, and that they see there isn't a mapped landslide at a location, which means there shouldn't be a landslide hazard, but that's obviously not the case, and also can be tricky with landslide warning systems in terms of developing and assessing failed and false positives, false alarms. You might not have as many false alarms as you think if you had a larger or more complete inventory. And so I think ultimately what we might be able to facilitate is a framework for assessing completeness and uncertainty and the interrelation between those in a landslide warning system framework. So the next comment, this is something that I found a little bit less well defined, that there's no existing ontology for landslide warning system data. I guess I would pose the question to the group, what does this mean, and why is this needed? What concept categories and relations need to be defined for landslide warning system data, and how could we go about setting common concepts and definitions for landslide warning system data? To me, I think it means, going back to some of the previous comments, is defining clear criteria for some of the issues related to data uncertainty that we talked about in the previous slide. But I'd like, if anyone who made some of this suggestion of an ontology or clear definitions might want to chime in and elaborate on what you meant. Alessandro, I see you've got, someone had their hand up.
I can try to comment according to one of my most recent experiences, because we are deploying an early warning system in India, in some areas of India. Those are rainfall-induced landslides. And when we start to discuss with local people, but also the Geological Survey of India, we found out that actually we use completely different words to define the same thing. And so we spent most of the time, the initial time, to come up with a common ontology for the definition of the terms. And this is not just related to the type of data, but for most of the component of the early warning system, because early warning system is not just like data, but the models. A very important thing is the social part of the use of the early warning system. So how to communicate the information. And then there is where you have to come up with a very common ontology on the meaning of the words and how to use them. Believe me, well, we are Italians and we are working with the Geological Survey of India and the British Geological Survey. And we have three completely different definitions of the terms. Well, actually, I can say that Italians and British were kind of agree for most of the things, but with the Indian friends, for example, they call subsidence slow displacement along the slopes, which means nothing for us. But for them, it is a process. So when you define the early warning system, you have to define what you predict, what you forecast, how, at what scale, and then you have to come up with the idea that it has to be agreed a priori, what you mean. That's it, what I think means ontology for, I wouldn't say for landslide warning system data, but for the entire system.
Okay, so this is maybe like a broader issue for LandAware, but I guess for this specific working group, we just need to be aware of that in terms of how different types of data might be interpreted and what that might mean. So, like you said, slope displacement might have a different term everywhere. I'm just trying to make notes so that I keep this thread. And I see a number of hands have gone up. Michele, do you want to chime in?
Yes, I want to just say that indeed in working group 1, there is a task. They're working at a glossary at the moment, and so that is indeed the idea. No, Alessandro was saying, and also Ben was saying, maybe it's more than just data working group. The idea is that in order to also catalog the different systems that are available out there, operational out there, either at local scale or at regional, territorial, geographical scale, we need a common vocabulary in order to define the different elements, components, and parts of these systems. Therefore, in the past few months, a draft glossary has been drafted. It will be presented during the MayDay. So I just want to tell you that Working Group 1 is indeed starting working on this.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Michele. And I guess maybe before Corey, you chime in, I'll just state that maybe a good solution on our end is to think about in the metadata and in our repository to try to link specific categories to the glossary so that we're kind of not recreating the wheel in that front. And maybe there's someone on this working group who's also working with Working Group 1 who can kind of keep us honest and on track. And yeah, John, thanks for sharing the Kentucky survey. And Matt Crawford's done some great work on that too. Corey, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry I'm talking so much. So one of the things I just, for this working group specifically and thinking about the other working groups, are trying to understand what aspect of landslide early warning on the data side we're focusing on. And again, I internally and with our clients, I use kind of the model put together in the summary paper that Fausto led, probably with some of you, on landslide model, warning system. And right now we're feeding the landslide models and thinking about the rigor around the data that we'd need to feed the models. And then when we get into system development is starting to apply machine learning and data analytics to that data. So again, I don't know if I have an answer here. It's something that I'm thinking about is what are the bounds of this group as to the phase of landslide early warning, that where we are collecting data and looking at standards on collecting data. Is it building the front end, the base data that gets used analytically and applied? Anyways, I'm not sure if I framed that correctly, Ben. Just something that was on my mind as we were talking about these various aspects of landslide early warning, because my brain goes many different places on when I think landslide early warning, because there's so many different components. But I think we're focused on building the models and getting the right data in place to inform the models.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think all of us are interested in data for the model development and building it. Although maybe there's some of us, I can't speak for everyone, who are focused specifically on the data collection side of things. But I mean, I think ultimately that I view at least the bounds of this working group as what can we do for defining database architecture and standards so that when we develop models, we'll be able to refer to a common ontology of data quality. What does this resolution mean temporally, spatially, and things like that? And so ultimately, I think that's what I hope that we as a working group can contribute, is some, even if it's not standards that everyone's going to adhere to, some common way of addressing data uncertainty and data quality that then can be used by model developers and or for evaluation of different modeling approaches, that we know that there's some kind of standardized consistency across. And so, so you're giving me a giant thumbs up there. Thanks for that. Okay. Anyone else want to comment? I don't want to be the only one talking here, Corey and I, but Michaela, maybe you have some insights into other working groups where we're encroaching on that. I don't know.
Well, what I can say is that many times, these discussions about trying to frame the objectives of the different working groups end up saying that indeed, those boundaries are fuzzy, and we are dealing with things that interact, as we said for the ontology glossary, but also in general, if we are thinking about the different elements of a LandAware Working system, we can divide those elements in different categories depending on how we look at the systems. So what I can say is that in this initial phase of the network, I think that it doesn't matter much whether we overlap the different working groups, because I know I'm here maybe mainly listening in this working group, but I'm saying it doesn't matter much if different initiatives end up doing things, different working groups end up doing things that could be later on joined, but no, but I don't see it as a problem really, because it's an initial phase, and so again, each single group is trying to define broader objectives, but also tasks and specific initiatives to carry on in the short term, not only in the long term. So, yeah, that's what I wanted to say at the moment.
Okay. Well, thanks. You can kind of just keep us in line if we encroach too much, and also really make those valuable connections. So that's really useful to know about the Working Group 1 glossary. There's no need to recreate that wheel, and if there's the Working Group specifically getting into the modeling side, then maybe we can inform
another
them
issue that at some point came up, I'm not sure whether in Working Group 1 or Working Group 7, was the issue of references, a list of references, bibliography that could be shared among everyone. It's never neutral, a list of references. You have to decide what you want to list, and also, what's important for who. But also that it's a task that I think it's a general network task, not a specific working group task. And anyway, somebody has to carry it on. So maybe that will come from some group, but then it will be shared with everybody. Or as Dalia knows, maybe we will decide at the executive committee level to have a task force for that. Those are issues that will come. Maybe, the MayDay event with all those different sub-events will be a chance for all of us to understand what's going on in these first few months, what has been going on in the first few months of the network.
That sounds good. Yeah, I'm planning to have a lot of coffee that 24 hours. This idea of a glossary list, or not glossary, a reference list too, that certainly we could, the benchmark data set list and or our repository could be, some subset of that in terms of the data references list. So I think that we're getting close to the end of the hour, and the last slide that I had, at least for today, was this need for, this is, I think, more of a planting the seed, and we can have some initial discussion now, and just wanted to get people thinking about this and also thinking about what other questions you'd like to pose. But, we all agree that there is a need for this kind of centralized repository, but what would it look like? Is it just a list of links on a website? Is it a set of metadata standards that are published or communicated in some other way? Where would it be housed? How would it be sustainably managed? Who would be in charge of managing it, and who's going to pay them to do that? So these are kind of some big order questions that we're going to have to think about over the coming 2 years. And if anyone has some initial thoughts now, that would be great. Or additional questions, let me know, and I'm going to start noting them down so that we have kind of a working document and aren't losing all these great ideas that come up.
And also, if others have example templates from other inventories of other hazards, of other sources of information that they think could actually be useful to help us define what a repository could look like, that would also be helpful. So we have some examples of maybe a framework to consider as we build this. So again, thoughts from the group on need, the importance, the approach? Go
So
ahead.
I had a couple of thoughts. One is that I think like starting with the list of links is that's a great place to start. So like the first thing, maybe the first thing you want to do is like organize your thoughts about what data is going into the system before you try to actually put it in a warehouse and make it downloadable to everybody. So I think like creating a list of what you're trying to do, providing links to the sources of that data if they're available, that's definitely a good place to start. Because like as you're creating this repository, it has to react to the needs of the other groups and as well as the kind of the needs of the other elements of this this working group as well, because those are going to change. Like we're going to have a forum, we're going to discuss these things, and like whatever system we come up with is going to be constantly, like there's going to be new things that people want to add, new elements of the metadata that people want to have. And so it seems like it's going to be a work in progress at first. And so I wouldn't try to, especially not really big data sets. I think it would be, we wouldn't want to start with that, but we could possibly work towards that as a goal. As far as the standards, I think that's a discussion that we can't solve today, and we're going to have to just iterate on it for a long time. How can it be sustainably managed? I think that's maybe a challenge, because unless we're talking about a very small set of benchmark data sets, if we really want to list a lot of data, and I think that's what the community would appreciate, it would actually be a lot of work. And I recall, I want to say it's last summer, but maybe it was the one before that, there was like some student at ICL who was like trying to compile inventories, but actually inventories are just one element of kind of everything we've committed to as part of this working group. And so at least for the benchmarks, it seems to me that there is a need for other kinds of data as well, not just inventories, but in situ measurements, rainfall data, etc. So all of those things could conceivably be part of this this repo as really kind of multi-topic and not just the inventories, even though that's kind of what I spend the most time thinking about and what we've kind of focused on in our spreadsheet so far. One initial suggestion to how to manage it. It seems to me that like a great place to do this is actually GitHub. It's a good place to collaborate, because somebody can set up an account for free, and this is basically all public information. So there's no need to keep it private, and people can just make suggestions through the GitHub interface and make edits to the data, and like everybody can see like where the links can be updated pretty easily, and it's also parsable by machines. So like if you have a if you just want to run your script and then quickly download everything, you can point it at that and get your downloads fairly quickly. So that would be my suggestion on how to get started, but obviously it's something to discuss.
Yeah, thanks for those great suggestions, Thomas. I'm going to make note of all those and certainly send those around. Anyone else have any thoughts or ideas? We're right at the 10 o'clock mark, so I understand if people would like to sign off. If not,
there is one.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there is one repository of earthquake-induced landslides by Schmidt et al. I think that's also a good way to list the inventories or the whatever the kind of data we have. But if we can link all the data that are relevant to the inventories that we make. I think that will solve the problem of hosting it at different places. GitHub is a good one, but I think the USGS is also, repositories are also good. Just a suggestion. I mean, whatever the thoughts are. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'm going to send that link as well. There's a landslide, earthquake triggered ground failure, which includes landslides and liquefaction. So that's something we're working on ingesting into the national map, but it is a global repository, and that's maybe another route. So since we're a little past the hour, I think I propose we wrap up, and I just want to remind everyone to please volunteer for some sort of programming during our couple hours on MayDay, to also potentially volunteer to present at one of our future working group meetings. Otherwise, we'll start kind of reaching out and trying to put together a program for those. And yeah, any additional feedback you're welcome to put in those Google spreadsheets. And any final comments, Dahlia or others?
Only if you know of others that would want to participate, we welcome them. So please, you can ask to be a member of LandAware. You can be asked to be a member of this team. So we encourage participation from your colleagues or others you think could really benefit or contribute to this working group and the LandAware network overall.
I just have a question for you and Ben. Given that you've been the only working group that decided to record and also post online on our webpage the first meeting, are you going also to do the same for the second one, or keep it private?
I've recorded it. I guess if no other working groups are doing it, we don't need to per se. I don't know that this necessarily needs to be online. What do people think? I guess, would it be better if we don't?
I think the challenge is finding a convenient time for all of our members is really difficult. We're trying to satisfy as many time zones as possible, but recognize that there are many people who can't participate. So the idea of posting these was to enable those that maybe it's the middle of the night their time to still be aware of activities and contribute as best they can. So we have seen some people replying to the Google spreadsheets, even if they weren't at the meeting. So we could continue to post them as long as everybody here is okay with that.
I support your idea completely.
Okay, cool. We will then. Great. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for your input, and if you have other ideas, I think what I'm going to do in the coming weeks is summarize a little bit this and send it around to everyone. If you have more ideas, put them in the spreadsheet, and those will make it into our discussion for the next meeting. Marcel, I see you put your video on. Did you want to say something?
Thank you, Marcel.
No, it's late. I started 10 hours ago with video meetings, and so sorry I was not very active, but I was listening, and next time I hope I will be more active. So
No, I think
good job.
It's a real advantage that we can all get together, but it's also real hard with the 24-hour-a-day global community. So we do our best. That's all we can.
Perfect.
Good. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening or sleep.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, Ben, I'm going to jump off. Thank you so much. Great job. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I couldn't hear.